right. Well, I have only been on for about 20 minutes, and so I don't know all the things that have been covered. I think the way I'm seeing the situation, the energy that I'm in seems to be a bit more somber than the energy that I am joining in the group, and so I don't want to be a drag. But if you're asking me to share a few quick things, I would say as a result, so we're paying attention to Earth Day and 50 years of Earth Day, but we're paying also attention to the current crisis happening in the world and how those relate and where we'll be moving forward, right? So as a result of the quarantines and the shutdown of travel, probably most of you know the food supply throughout India, Northern Africa, and much of the Middle East has been profoundly damaged. Locusts in some areas, stuff rotting in the fields in other areas. But we're looking at a damage of global food supply for about 2 billion people. And that's before we were already looking at, related to Earth Day, that this upcoming summer in India and the next 2 summers have 52 Celsius heat waves that were also intended to destroy the crops and lack of groundwater. And we go pretty quickly from the destruction of crops to wars over resource, to cleaving along existing tension lines like Muslim-Hindu lines, to the escalation of that to things like India-Pakistan wars. And so those kinds of things are unfolding so fast. We've obviously never seen a negative price on oil before. And the negative price on oil will drive most of the small oil producers out of business to be able to massively consolidate the power of oil producers. But we go from, during the time of the pandemic, it's seeming like there was less emissions because there were less cars and stuff moving, to radically dropped prices of oil that start to create whole new markets for demand, driving the burning of fossil fuels way up over the next little bit. We see the increased tension between US and China over this situation, as well as increasing tensions in the EU that are being intentionally driven by Russia that wants the Baltic Alliance back and various things like that. So, and we see ramping militarism right now, the China ramping its military forces, US ramping its military forces in a way that is unprecedented in the lives of anyone who is on this call. We also see the very strong pressure to start releasing quarantine when the situation that quarantine was created for would be released when ubiquitous diagnostic testing, some effective method of contact tracing, some early treatment or something are put in place. Otherwise, you just get a spike again. And then the information ecology is almost perfectly broken. Like you see, just every day I'm kind of mind blown of articles coming out saying we did the randomized control trial and hydroxychloroquine doesn't work and it's doing late stage assessment, and antivirals almost never work in late stage, they work in early stage, but it's being said as if it means the whole thing. And a few of the studies even said done within the first 24 to 48 hours, which is very misleading because it meant 24 to 48 hours of being admitted to the ICU, which is already late stage, but it's the exact words you would use to think of early stage, which is information warfare. And then there's the Santa Clara study of, it's not going to be that bad because the background levels are already very high, but the study was just absolute trash. It was calibrated to have less than 5% accuracy of being able to identify false negatives. So it was oriented to about a 20x on the false positive side. And so we're making policy decisions based on and it's important to understand that as far as the political left and right go in the US, they're both just doing information warfare through science and then through journalism. So I have identified pretty much no sources of information that don't need further vetting. And the virus was really just, you have systemic fragility, right? We lived in a world where we have systemic fragility. The virus was enough of a hit to that to start this cascade of things. And what happens with the food supply? What happens with the kind of 4th generation hybrid warfare? What happens with this economic stimulus that's occurring and the fact that there's now economic competition at the very top of US and Western finance between the 2008 big banks and kind of Blackstone and the SPVs that the Treasury is working with now. We are in a situation where a radically different and better world is more possible because the existing one is more unstable, right? And it's important to understand that when you have an existing system and it becomes unstable, there's more possible change, but it's more possible change in any direction. And that's kind of the thing I want people to get, is that right now, things are trending in the direction of a lot of just super fucking serious issues that I don't know if anybody is really prepared. I mean, nobody could be really prepared for. And so I guess the thing I want to say is, historically, we never had fall of empires and transition of power be a peaceful thing. Like, that never happened as a peaceful, easy thing. There's a difficult phase from the transition of one dominant structure to a new system, especially a new global meta system. So we are in a phase where we can hopefully avert a lot of the catastrophes and make beautiful things happen. But there's no chance of doing that if you don't actually understand who the very powerful players are, what they're oriented to do, how the systemics works. So that there's a kind of positivity that's based on naivete that bugs the fuck out of me, because it's just guaranteed to fail and waste human effort. There's a kind of positivity that says, in order to prevent harms and to serve the sacred, I want to understand the harm landscape very well so that I can solve all of it. And it wants to be super fucking sober and clear to be empowered to actually create positive results rather than pretend that they're already happening. So I think that would be my hope, is that people like take their celebration at the beauty of life and their fear, anger, whatever, at the harm of life, and realize they're connected, right? There's a love of life that has you want to celebrate it, want to be hopeful, be concerned about it being harmed, and transition all that into, how can I understand what I need to understand to be effective? And how can I strengthen and fortify myself to continue to be effective of what's going to be very hard work for quite a while? Not a sprint, but, you know, an ultra marathon of intense work for some time.
And Daniel, thank you for always being an elder to us beyond your years. Yeah. I speak for the community and how much we all respect and appreciate your deep dedication and the integrity with which you hold it. These are the most critical challenges of our time. So maybe just at one closing question is, what's your recommendation for us as a community, the people you're speaking to today? What can we do together that you would, what would be your kind of invitation right now?
Not everybody has to understand what's happening with financial warfare and information warfare and cyber warfare that's not what everyone's is going to be. There's going to be a lot of people where it's like, what is yours to do is to check in on the older people who are lonelier and more fragile and more fucked up in your communities than they've already been, and they were already very fragile. And so the info that you need for the kind of agency that is yours is the network map of who's vulnerable, right? And so I'm not saying that everyone should try to be informed in things that are not necessarily what is theirs to act on. So having some clarity of like where you feel that you can contribute and how best to do that. And as far as people want to be involved in some of the things that I know that a number of people in here want to, which is kind of systemic change or change of the underlying infrastructure, culture, politics, economics, you can't solve problems you don't understand. And you can't create solutions in a space where you don't understand what's already influencing that space. And so I would say just deepen the commitment to what it takes to be effective. And it's like, there's a lot of things I might want to do, but I just can't pick up a guitar and shred like Jimi Hendrix. If I wanted to enough, I'd have to train a lot, right? And so if I want to enough, I'll train a lot. And the same thing, if I want to understand what's going on enough to have a perspective that's worth anything to contribute, I'm going to have to train at understanding what's going on quite a lot. And otherwise, I'll probably be wrong about most of it. And so, yeah, I would just like to encourage some depth of commitment and kind of reality check around that, so that the feeling hopeful is actually based in something real. Wait, there's one more thing. One of the definitions of sociopathy is actually an inability to feel certain negative emotions. If you don't feel shame and guilt and remorse, you can hurt other people. All of the spiritual ideals that have you orient to just wanting to be kind of happy and hopeful and stoked all the time make you kind of a sociopath. And so if the world is hurting and you're stoked, fuck you. You know, like there's something wrong with you. It's important that you can actually feel what's going on. It's also important that you can say, man, I failed. I worked my ass off and I failed, so I can learn. If I can't admit that I failed, I can never learn what didn't work to do a better job. So I want to acknowledge whenever I'm doing something that's working well and when it's failing, not so that I can just be down on myself uselessly, but so that I can learn. So I both want to acknowledge success and failure. I want to acknowledge things that are going well and things that aren't going well. And I want to feel that whole range of feelings. All the emotions are part of the emotional intelligence system. And if you reject any of them, you'll be a kind of fragmented person.
Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is the medicine we need right now. And I feel, as a collective, I feel there's that invitation to mastery. Part of the design of what we've been launching with the Up Game is literally half of every cycle is focused on your own self-mastery, on your being, of like, know thyself. Like, how do we reintroduce things like the Eleusinian mysteries, where we bring people back through ceremony and ritual into like deep relationship with their self. And so I feel this is you're such a guiding light in our community for this, through and through integrity. Thank you so much. And
I would like to add one thing, just since you asked me here. I remember, because I grew up in a kind of Vedantic community, and when I first went to the temple, all that I did in the temple was clean the dishes and clean the fucking floor for months. Like, and I had to earn the right of showing that I could show up and do the thing I said I would do and bring a good attitude to it and whatever, and just ground, be able to be present and service oriented and like that, before learning the first meditation technique, which was then very simple. And nobody talked about mastery quickly. Nobody talked about the great mysteries. That was like, to the extent that you knew about them, you never talked about them. And those were earned pretty slowly. So I have never met anyone who is worthy of the title of mastery who refers to themselves that way. Bugs the fuck out of me when people talk about their superpowers and they're a polymath and a meta whatever. Like, just other people can use those terms about you, but I definitely have faith in the likelihood for someone to succeed proportional to a real calibrated sense of humility and capability.